Hello, thank you for joining me in this journey through Genesis in January. This is going to be an exciting time. It's going to be 38 days, 38 chapters in Genesis, so it'll go longer than the month of January. And we'll be looking at narrative. So these are stories of the people of the nation of Israel, the Hebrew people, the Hebrew scriptures, and the origins of the world, which is the interpretation through the cultic practices of the Hebrew people, how they interpreted um, how God created the world and why they worship God. So, I want to introduce you a little bit to the voices you're going to be hearing from in the book of Genesis. I had to get out my old textbook from Old Testament class at seminary and look into the different voices that are there. I remembered it, and then I just wanted to be able to really tell you what we're looking at. And so for today's purposes, Happy New Year. It is Friday, the first day of the year, January 1st, and we'll be looking at the first chapter of Genesis. In the first chapter of Genesis, it begins within the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth, right? So this is the creation poem. It is a poem because it's structured such as God created and said it was good. And there was morning and there was evening the first day. And then the pattern repeats and repeats and repeats until the sixth day. And then the actual poem goes into the second chapter. It ends at chapter 2, verse 3. And then chapter 2, verse 4 begins the second creation narrative, which is poetic as well, but not as poetic as the first one, and it is a completely different voice. The priestly tradition is identified as that first voice that we hear in the first chapter of Genesis, where we see God creating order out of chaos. So the priestly tradition would be editors, redactors, all formulated the Torah, wrote the Torah, edited the Torah together after the Babylonian exile. So that is where scholars think this was all written down. And the people that wrote at least the first chapter and until the second chapter, verse 3, whereas the people with the priestly tradition, what the scholars call the priestly tradition, very concerned about order. Okay, so this is what God does. God creates order out of chaos. Very concerned about cultic practices in the temple because the priests, right? So we would want to go into chapter 2 because at the very end of chapter 1, you end with the sixth day and God's created everything. And then whoever put the chapter and verse in there cut the cut the poem off at the bottom and stuck it in the next bit because the very last bit is very important to the priestly tradition. It is what God rested on the seventh day. And in that creation order, God creates the week, right? By identifying that there's a first day and there's a last day. And there are 6 days of work and 1 day of rest. And that is how the Sabbath worked and how things got started for cultic practices in the temple. And the priests would like us to read the first chapter plus chapter 2, the first 3 verses, to understand what the creation narrative says about the life we need to lead, what it is to practice Judaism, to be a good Jew, to practice that well, and that's what they were concerned about, and that's why the creation narrative looks like this. Now, given all that scholarly stuff and putting that aside, working into our own spiritual life as we begin our year, it is good to know that God created. Any kind of chaos that is out there, God will make order of it. That is the message for our hearts and for our lives as we begin this year, is that God created order out of chaos. When there was nothing but inky blackness is what the message says. God created the light, and he separated the light from the darkness, and he named it. And so what we can do is interpret that as the God who can create the cosmos, the universe. What more could God do for you in your life or in the world with the pandemic or whatever else is going on with your family, with your neighborhood, with your community, with your own soul and your own heart? God created order out of chaos. And that is the message for today. But also, we need that scholarly stuff to understand where it's coming from and to get this picture of why we have two stories of how God created the world. But tomorrow will be the day we look at Adam and Eve. So, God bless you. Have a wonderful day.